Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, and as a lifelong BioWare fan, it's been a bumpy ride for us these last 10 years or so. For many people, the decline began with Mass Effect 3, but I adore that game from top to bottom, and it really started for me with Dragon Age Inquisition with what we call the Hinterlands problems and just the game's excessive bloat. From there on, it would be games like Mass Effect Andromeda that I would approach with a cautious level of optimism, only to be let down by the thing I know BioWare best for, which is the writing. And then Anthem, as we all know, felt like a step in the wrong direction for this single-player RPG studio. When we heard rumors of the next Dragon Age game being multiplayer only, like many of you, I was holding my breath that they would switch directions. When it was confirmed they did, that was exciting, but how much of the multiplayer game was I going to feel in this new game that would eventually come out? Dragon Age: The Veilguard has been in development for a long while, so it was really nice of BioWare to say, hey, when you come play this game for the first time, Matty, you get to play 6 hours of it. And that is the most I have ever experienced in any preview, and I've been doing this a long while. We're lucky if we get 2 to 3 hours. 4 is really pushing it. 6 is unheard of. All this content was hosted across Act 1. There are 3 acts in the game. I got to play 5 sections in the prologue. I got to explore the crossroads and recruit Lucanus, who is one of the game's companions. I got to see choice and consequence on full display by making a big choice, then also loading both save files to see the repercussions of said choice. And then I got to play the assault on Weishaupt. This not only let me see a surprising amount of the story, companion interactions, and consequences of my choices, but I also got to dive into the combat of the game, both in the low levels and the highest levels. The combat really does feel like a culmination of every BioWare game ever before, including Anthem, and I just can't put into words how relieved I am stepping away from this preview. I'm also really happy to say that thus far, at least, there are no remnants of the original multiplayer approach to this game whatsoever. Surely I did have my nitpicks at times, but I really do feel like we are building up to the BioWare is back moment we've all been waiting for. That's especially if Acts 2 and 3 can deliver on what I experienced in Act 1. I did travel to San Francisco to play Dragon Age: The Veilguard. To be transparent, EA did pay for my flight and my stay while I was out there. They hosted the event on their EA Red Shores campus, which is absolutely insane. I now know where all of the Ultimate Team money is going. Yeah, just wanted to make sure I was clear on all of that. I try to do my best when it comes to that, but just want to make sure I'm fully transparent with how I got to the event. But that's enough build up. This is probably going to be my biggest preview ever because I have a lot to show you and a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. Opening up, let's talk about this character creator. I'm usually not one to get absorbed by this stuff. We've had great ones in the last year or so with Dragon's Dogma 2, Baldur's Gate 3. Those are 2 standout examples for me. But I really feel like Dragon Age: The Veilguard is the best we have ever seen. This system actually is used to build all the NPCs across the game, and this is extremely effective because it makes everyone look and feel different. Combined with various races, I really do feel like Veilguard's world was quite lived in. And the hair in this game, I know it's a small detail. Many of you are going to think I'm overhyping this game already, but it's ridiculous. And they have details down to cornea sliders. It's unbelievable. Larynx sliders, crazy. And you pick between 3 face shapes, you could slide them around to make a hybrid of them all, and ultimately create the most fantastical version of yourself or someone completely different. You also, more fun, get to choose between 6 backgrounds. Think of these like your origin stories from Dragon Age Origins, and that will align you with certain factions and maybe even pit you against others. And as well, you do pick a class to play as. You can select some decisions from Inquisition that will shape your world. Unfortunately, I cannot talk about those. I cannot show them to you. I can only let you know they are there. Now, the visuals have been a point of contention for Dragon Age: The Veilguard. For many, BioWare made an incredible fantasy game in 2009 in Dragon Age Origins, and then have made 3 more that go in the opposite direction artistically at the very least. To me, it's an evolution of what Inquisition had started, so I don't look at it as too much of a radical departure, especially when I look at BioWare's games as a whole. I also think this new art style really lets the environments pop with some great color work and lighting. Locations like the lighthouse, which serves as a hub, really stunned me with just how good they looked. Places like Treviso remind me of like a gothic Italy and felt totally distinct from any other location I've been to in Dragon Age. Minrathous really does speak for itself in the opening parts of the game, but more importantly, I'm showing you colorful things, vibrant things, and you're like, where's my dark fantasy? The best thing I can say visually I took away from this experience is that BioWare showed some of the flexibility in the art style, and there is a point that you come across a village that is full of the blight, bodies entangled and skewered, and I pretty immediately realized this game does not hesitate to take a dark turn both visually and story-wise. If there was anything that I walked away from my preview certifiably meh on, it would be the new Darkspawn designs. I don't really like them at all. There is a lore reason for the way they appear and why their eyes are beady red. I just don't think it's a really good direction to take them in because they're these horrifying creatures in Origins. I feel they should always be treated that way. And you don't really get that sense here. Even if they sound terrifying, they don't really look terrifying here in Dragon Age the Veilguard. Same goes for the new Qunari look. I don't like it at all. It looks like people except with horns, and that's not how the Qunari have looked, especially when you look at Dragon Age 2. That is a much better look for them, I think. Even in Dragon Age Inquisition, I think they look great. So yeah, I wasn't a fan of that either. The visuals aren't perfect. There are some distracting elements, but overall, I think BioWare's direction here has been strong and did have the ability to get dark and gritty when they needed it to do so. But look, I'm going to keep it real. I don't play BioWare games for the visuals. I just know this is something that a lot of people happen to care about. Me, I care about story and characters. And the last BioWare game I really did care about that in might have been Inquisition because I gave it a second chance and with Trespasser came to kind of enjoy it. But really, it was Mass Effect 3 that was the last time I can think of me being super invested in BioWare characters. For newcomers, I do think Dragon Age the Veilguard will be a great starting point. The game opens up with a briefing that catches you up to speed in a good way. Those who need the bare minimum details need only know that Solus is the Dreadwolf, he sealed away some elven gods in the Veil, and he wishes to undo that even if it will cost everyone their lives. Now, for those concerned that you're not going to get a deep cut here with the Veilguard, don't worry, they do lean into that. For example, let's take Solus, a character that many people are wondering, like, how active and involved will he be in this game? Well, I can't say for certain with the full product, but I can say in my experience that he's active more than I expected, not just when he's on screen, but also in ways that I'll leave for your own discovery, like being able to experience the Dreadwolf's memories, which builds his character and the plot off screen. It's really good stuff. It's some of my favorite parts from the preview, and I think long-term fans are going to eat this stuff up. Perhaps the best sense I got here from playing through some of the story is that nothing is being left on the table here. I did have the opportunity to speak with the game's director, Corinne Busche, both at the event, and afterwards we set up an interview where we spoke on a number of things. Indeed, BioWare did confirm with me that there is no planned DLC or expansions for Dragon Age Veilguard. Take a listen as to why. Is there a plan for DLC or expansion type content for Veilguard at all?
Yeah, it's a question we get a lot, and I understand why. I'm a huge fan of Trespasser as well. In fact, if I were to give any critique, it would only be that Trespasser is so central to the Dragon Age Inquisition story that arguably maybe that should have been part of the base game.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I actually say that is because we've had a lot of conversations about how expansive is this story? How far does it go? What is the conclusion and resolution? And really, we wanted to make it the most complete, out-of-the-box package we possibly could, from the player experience, the narrative, everything else. So that's entirely our focus right now. Hard to say what the future holds, but I will say, we had discussions about, should this game end after Act 1? And the answer was an emphatic no. We needed to tell the whole story of the Veilguard. There's always a rich tapestry of lore and concepts and people and places. So, never say never. But right now, the entirety of the team is just focused on making sure this is the right game.
Yeah, I'm not feeling like there is going to be a degree of bloat here, and that's a good sign for those of you who are like me and put off a bit by where Inquisition went. We'll talk more about Inquisition later because BioWare has learned some key lessons on that, but I do want to bring some critiques to the forefront before we get into character work. When it comes to this game's cutscenes, there are times I felt like the transition from the cutscene to the map you were playing in-game was a little strange. Like, there was a time I went underwater with a boat spinning and all of a sudden I spawned in this dungeon. It didn't feel like there was a real connecting point between the two. I don't think it needs to be perfectly seamless, but just sometimes that loading screen break between what I last saw and what I'm seeing next, it can be a little bit jarring and I lose a bit of a sense of place there. It's a weird nitpick. I'm curious if it's going to grow as I play more of the game. Line delivery can also be a bit spotty for characters like Nev and Bellara. For example, Bellara delivered the same line as Harding during one point on the assault on Weishaupt, yet Harding sounded to me at least way better and more convincing, whereas Nev during combat could at times be extremely flat. But on that note, let's talk about characters because that's what defines these games. And for me, I didn't really indulge in too many side conversations given I wanted to save that for my own personal playthrough, but I do have thoughts on the cast. It feels like each character is really given an introductory mission to properly set you up with who they are. Characters like Nev and Harding don't really get that because they open the game with you, but since with Inquisition you do get familiar with Harding, there is that benefit there where you get to focus on Nev some more. But there are choices that you're going to make that are going to play a factor here, and that'll build your adoration for these characters. For example, as someone who did not care too much for Harding in Inquisition, I am ready to die for Harding now. Why is that? Because I made a choice that hurt her badly, really badly. I made a choice where I was like, hey, come on with me into combat, because I'm thinking like this will make our relationship better. And she walked out of it bruised and battered. And this wasn't just a single cutscene moment. Throughout the entire duration of the opening parts of the game, Harding was hurt so bad that you would see it physically, and she was unavailable for a mission. Of course, they have the classic, X approved of this, X disapproved of that. You have more particular ones, like you exchanged verbal jabs with Solus. So there's a lot of reactivity, and I'm curious how major it gets, but I can't talk about what exactly happened. I did get to see it on a bigger stage, and it's pretty impressive what BioWare is doing here, because little choices like these, I think, are going to go a longer way than what they're doing with the narrative, because it draws you closer to the characters. And let's talk about some of those. First and foremost, I want to talk about Balara, who is peppy and inquisitive, but I really love how she was able to take things seriously. At first, I thought she was going to be the character that always broke the tension, but she really does level with the crew very often. Lucanus will undoubtedly, without a shadow of a doubt, be a fan favorite. He was the star of the show for me and for many others I spoke to at the event. From the cool factor and my desire to just save him from himself, to the smooth Italian accent and how high stakes his story felt, I was all about him. I didn't get much from companions like Tosh, Davrin, or Emmerich. You do get a little bit of Davrin thanks to how the Grey Wardens play a factor in the assault on Weishaupt. But yeah, the stakes felt very high with that assault on Weishaupt. And the stakes are only going to raise, apparently, according to the game's director.
Act 2, all I'm going to say is that Act 2 is one of consequences. You're really going to have to live with and experience a lot of what came to pass in Act 1 and deal with that not only within the landscape of Thedas, but deal with that personally. It's also where your alliances and factions start becoming even more important. This is a world-ending threat. You can't do it alone. And then, of course, Act 3. I'm going to stay quiet on Act 3, but yeah, we're quite proud of what we've got there. We really hope players like it as well.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll just stop there with the storytelling. I think they're heading in a really good direction, and I'm feeling more confident than ever. We're on the rails to a little bit of a Mass Effect 2 moment, potentially, of like, dear God, what's going to happen to all these characters that I am caring for? So we'll see as we get closer to the game's release. But ladies and gentlemen, linearity, let's talk about it. Dragon Age Inquisition was known to be contentious for its open zones that famously had the hinterlands problem, which then bloated the game. And one of my favorite takeaways from my preview with the Veilguard is just how much fat has been trimmed off the experience. I only saw side content that focused entirely on characters relevant to the main story, and that's a huge upgrade from Inquisition as far as I'm concerned. And BioWare really did study Inquisition in ways that I think people need to hear, so I'll let Corinne do all of the talking.
I wasn't part of BioWare at the time, but I enjoyed the hell out of that game as a fan. We learned some hard lessons about going too big with content that maybe isn't as focused as it could be. And sometimes learning those lessons are the perfect thing you need to then push the ball forward. So I would say it's back to our roots. Awesome. And one of the things that I'm waiting for players to tell us what they think, but that would be the biggest compliment in the world.
Now, don't let that deceive you, as she also mentioned in the same interview that it's not a small game. Despite me poking around for answers, I couldn't get any direct indication of just how much content is here, but I was told we could expect something between Dragon Age Origins and Inquisition here, and if you want 100% everything, that you'd be at it for, her words, not mine, weeks. That being said, this is about 40 to 90 hours if we're using those games as a gauge if we don't account for DLC. If we're talking Inquisition plus all DLC, we're talking way over 100 hours. Still, my point being is this game is much more structured and confined. There are points where you can explore, but this is a more mission-centric BioWare game, which is what I have been looking for for a while, and it feels like there's a lot of lessons BioWare learned from many of their previous games here, but in particular, you see Inquisition's lessons learned the most. In all honesty, the framework for Veilguard felt very Origins to me, where I'm bouncing around all these parts of Ferelden and then going back to my party camp. That's kind of what's happening here, where you're bouncing all over the crossroads to different parts of Northern Thedas, and then you're going to go back to the lighthouse, which is your hub, and hang out with your companions. So the crossroads are these areas between reality, if you will, where you travel through illuvians or mirrors that, whatever, lore bombing you. You get to go to these parts that you get to explore further. This is where some of the side content lies, and then it kind of leads you to the next part of the main story. Now, at the lighthouse itself, like I mentioned, this is your hub. Think of it like your party camp in Origins, where you just get to hang out, talk to all of these characters, learn more about them, develop your relationships with them. You also get to decorate your own place a little bit with things you collect around the world or buy around the world, and you can upgrade your equipment here. So you'll be here frequently, and think of this as the home base. So there's a ton of investment here for character building and exploration, and I think it's all being woven together pretty damn good. Now let's talk a bit about combat, because this is another thing that I think BioWare didn't show off very well with some of the marketing for the game. So playing is believing, and I actually think this game is insanely fun. The way Dragon Age has always reinvented itself, it's happening here again, where you had Origins being more of a traditional CRPG, and that worked very well as one. 2 was an action game that had little flash or substance to it, and essentially was a breeze, especially as a mage. Inquisition was a mix of the two, and to me, felt a little weird. Veilguard finds itself in the middle of all three as far as I'm concerned, as well as pulling from the likes of Mass Effect and Anthem to give it its own feel. In a strange way, Dragon Age the Veilguard is a love letter to all prior BioWare games. For example, it reminds me a lot of Origins, where you're swapping weapon sets, but also, and this is no exaggeration, you're going to pause the game frequently to tactically assess the situation and take down your foes. And I was pausing this game more than any Dragon Age game before since Origins. This also reminds me of Dragon Age 2 a bit. This could be a redemption arc for fans of this game. Many were underwhelmed at the time when Dragon Age 2 was first released, and while I've come to love it, I get why others didn't at first, and still don't, given how radical of a departure it was from Origins. Dragon Age 2's combat was extremely simple, and a large reason for that was the game was made in an extremely short period of time, like a year's time. So in that context, it was quite impressive. But my point here is it feels like the skeleton from that game has been resurrected and built upon. You can now switch between light and heavy attacks, use ranged weapons to crush through barriers, parry or dodge attacks. There's even little wrinkles I didn't anticipate, like being able to fire off a shot from my bow mid-dodge, which are these tiny things that maintain combat momentum but go so far. As for Inquisition, this is the game I see the most when it comes to Veilguard's combat evolutions, and personally I think it's for the best. Inquisition always felt like a game to me that didn't know what it wanted to be, and that's as someone who's played through the game 3 times. You have a little tactics, a little action, but it never really quite picks a lane, and for many people that's what makes it special. Dragon Age Veilguard knows it is an action game, but does not forsake the tactics that have defined the series since it began, despite people who haven't played it yet claiming the opposite. What that means is, for example, I for one was up in arms when I heard like, hey, we can't control our companion. I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know, that's a bold choice there. But then I played the game and was all over the map, activating companion abilities, commanding them on who to attack, zipping all over the place, and realized this was actually a pretty smart design decision to go with. I was also nervous when I heard that this would be a full action game because I did like Inquisition's ability to pause the action. Then I played Veilguard and paused the action to strategize more than I ever did during Inquisition. Inquisition's combat felt a little slow, particularly in my case where my last playthrough was a Canary with two-handed weapons. I felt that slow pace was necessary for Inquisition because you wanted to stop, assess the situation. It was a little more tactically driven. Then I played the Veilguard and realized I could have my cake and eat it too, because this game could go really fast and you could assemble tactics and tell your companions what to do at the same time. There are more obvious inspirations from Inquisition in things like the defining title, where Inquisition, you're the Inquisitor, in Veilguard, you are a Rook, also the visuals, obviously. But yeah, it's more of an evolution here that leaves behind the weaker elements, in my opinion, and that's also the case in design, as stated earlier, when it comes to the world and exploration. Then you have Mass Effect, which is pretty obvious. The ability selection wheel is here, and I think it feels at home in Dragon Age. I've always been a proponent of this idea. I think it's playing out well, and that's because of the element they borrowed from Anthem. The primers and detonators are here, and they are combining for some seriously powerful and stunning attacks with your companions. And this really determined who I brought with me, since you can easily identify enemy weaknesses. So if I know I'm going to face like a lot of Darkspawn, let's say they're weak to fire damage, it's like, okay, I'm going to bring like a mage with me, and that mage can combo with like Harding, and then I can combo with both of them, and now we got some good tech going. So you'll draw an attachment to these characters by what they can do in combat, as well as the words they speak to you. And I haven't even gotten to the actual depth of this system. This is just surface level mechanical speak. Yeah, I don't know how they balance this. I really don't, but it made more sense when Corinne told me this.
We're very much focused on wrapping things up, focused on a couple of quality of life and bug fixes that'll be coming out. The TLDR is we've been playing the full game start to finish for a long time, particularly as it comes to the gameplay and the progression system, the skill tree in particular. It's taken, I would say we've been focused on the past year on testing, validating, looking for spikes, balance issues. Wow. It's been quite a challenge, but we've had the time, which is really what these challenges come down to. When you have this kind of deep RPG complexity, build crafting, it's all time. It's all time. And incredibly smart designers, smarter than me.
So yeah, that's the combat on a mechanics level. That's why it's probably really balanced, but it's really the classes and the skill trees that give it true depth and agency. So I got hands-on time with early builds that I crafted myself straight from the beginning of the game, as well as some of the level 30 builds for the rogue and mage that BioWare had set up for themselves. And for reference, the level cap is 50. Now, a lot of Veilguard's combat is built upon its enemy design. At its root, it is simple, but I do think the usage of it thus far has been effective. So you have your standard enemies with health that you're just going to cleave through with ease. Then there are also enemies with a blue bar atop their health bar, and that's going to serve as a barrier. This is taken down through your range attacks, which force you to maneuver between CQC and ranged. Then there are armor enemies who require a heavy attack. So once the health bar is revealed, it's go time, and you can lay on maximum amount of damage. So now you're switching between CQC, ranged, heavy attacks, and it never really diverts from that from my experience, but I didn't mind it because the encounters were always forcing me to alter my playstyles significantly during combat, where it was a really good mix of challenge and fun. Now, sometimes the camera would get jammed up, and that was unfortunate, but that was really the worst I experienced when it came to that. And each class has its own gimmicks. The mage has a good range with the staff, but also can switch to an orb and dagger combo that can be used to make arcane bombs that really let you nuke late game, but also let you nuke enemies with armor. And especially with the mage, you really get a feel for the weapon swapping, because with the staff, you're a bit slower, but you do damage from afar better. And with the orb and dagger, when they get close, you get that speed at the sacrifice of damage. Spells like Fireball and Chain Lightning were unlocked for me early game, whereas late game spells had zero gravity effects that allowed for some extremely powerful combinations. And at one point, I was chaining together 3 combos in a row between myself, Davrin, and Harding, where I really felt like the game was just clicking on all cylinders. Then there's the Warrior. I will break it up a little bit with all my positive talk and just say, I did like this one the least. It's very defensively oriented in what I experienced in the mid game, and I initially struggled with the melee combat in this game before clicking with it with the Rogue because of their advanced maneuverability. So it may have just been a skill issue, I'll admit. Now, this class thrives on parries, drawing aggro, and booting your opponents into the abyss below you. I personally wasn't a big fan of the alternative two-handed weapon that you'd have to whittle away at enemies' heavy armor. It felt a little too flimsy, and the other options at my disposal were far better. But what I did love, I'm still deciding if the mage edges it out, but the rogue. Oh, the rogue's abilities are nice. They're hella nice. So this is the one I played the most, especially in the late game. So I didn't really get to feel the power curve because I didn't start off in the beginning with the rogue, but you dual wield blades as you'd expect with a short bow for ranged encounters. And you could basically Chidori slam the ground and then do damage over time with electricity. You could throw down a turret to help you out in combat. This is aside from your companions, which is an awesome option here. And what's most exciting is I just told you about the skill tree. These are directions I went in, and for each class I played, there were 2 other directions I could have gone in to experience this playthrough. Don't let that intimidate you too much. BioWare did pack in a respecking feature that is free, so you'll be able to fully experiment. And as someone who's played RPGs like their whole lives, look, I'm going to be utilizing that respec feature heavily. The options in the skill tree, plus equipment, I'll get into it in a little bit, in the rune system. Like, there's a lot of choices here. It's a little overwhelming, I'm going to be honest. So it's good that they had a free respec option here that you can do at any point. And so that's just the leveling system. I haven't even talked about the equipment and the rune system, which has a bigger impact on builds than I really expected. So passive abilities on weapons really do let you lay an incredible amount of bonus damage, whether it be a particular element or even just increasing your general ability damage. Then the runes actually have active abilities that you could trigger in combat, like temporarily giving yourself resistances to certain attacks or even laying on more damage than normal. And you can go to the caretaker at the lighthouse, who allows you to exchange these passive abilities on your equipment at any time. So again, you got to experiment away. More importantly, for someone as a big RPG fan, this promotes the replayability from two angles. I'm seeing a lot of replayability in the story, and I'm hoping that what I saw in Act 1 delivers the same in Acts 2 and 3. But also now I'm looking down the pipe at a very deep gameplay system that could be replayable unto itself. So I'm very excited to see all the different ways I can play Dragon Age the Veilguard. And between that and the character creator, there is a sense of being who you want to be in this world. And I'm so excited for that because this is what I knew BioWare for. This is why I loved BioWare. These are the games I expected out of them for years and years and feel like I've been robbed of. So this could be a great return to glory. Do I have any final nitpicks to get out of my system? I guess if I have any concerns, it might be about the way progression in some rooms is handled. It's either killing a wave of enemies or oftentimes you'll delete these blight boils, and I feel like that's something the game leans on pretty heavily to open up certain rooms or doors. They're kind of the mini puzzles in the game and remind me a bit of God of War in that regard. This game does give a lot of people God of War energy, I will say. I feel like with the RPG mechanics and the conversations, it reminds me not fully of God of War, but I've heard that comparison drawn pretty often. And I feel like when the term naturally gets watered down to God of Veilguard, people are probably going to lose their mind, but I do sincerely think it's deeper than that. So there's a lot here, ladies and gentlemen, and I feel like I've only scratched the surface in some ways. There's so much I wanted to continue to check and verify, and more than anything, see how Acts 2 and 3 unfold. Because Act 1 had a very much beginning, middle, and end feel where that could have been a game. That could have definitely been a game, but they kept going. And kudos to them if they were holding stuff back for DLC and decided to pack it into this. It seems like BioWare is keenly aware of the situation they're in, if conversations I had with the development team were anything to go by. And they kind of know they need to hit a home run here. They know they need to prove to their fans and potentially even their investors that they're worth keeping around. So I feel really good about Dragon Age Veilguard walking away from my preview. And for the first time since Mass Effect 3, I am excited for a BioWare game without looking over my shoulder. So we'll see if the game delivers at launch. But BioWare showing out with 6 hours of gameplay was definitely a strong statement to me, and I'm very excited to play the final product. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave it in your hands now. Let me know what you think of everything I shared today on Dragon Age the Veilguard, as well as some of the snippets of the interview I had with Corinne Busche. Shout out to her for showing up on the channel and supporting this preview with some extra information and context. I'm looking forward to getting your thoughts. Fire away. Other than that, I'll catch you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.